Here's Iverson. Blew the defender. Stays right with him. Allen wants to go. Wants the baseline. Fade away. Yes!
He's way too good. He steps around Lou and drilled it. And the Sixers have scored 9 in a row.
7 straight points by Iverson. Looked like he was dead in the water.
The Sixers by 4. 40 seconds left.
I'm going to cover an athlete and a sport that you wouldn't think translates over to combat sports. I'm talking about basketball. And I'm talking about my favorite player of all time, Allen Iverson. Now, what does Allen Iverson have to do with combat sports? How does it translate over to boxing, kickboxing, or even MMA? He embodied that warrior mentality, which I was very inspired by when I would think about combat sports. Now, basketball is not a contact sport.
Drawing everybody to him, and then finding Corzine, who gets Sally up in the air, and you know that, I don't know, the extra hog tie.
Unless you're playing the 90s Detroit Pistons. But with Allen Iverson, he was physical despite his undersize. That inspired me because me being a smaller fighter when I was training, he was one of the first people I thought of. Now let's go over the things I actually learned from Allen Iverson. And trust me, it wasn't practice.
I mean, listen, we talking about practice. Not a game, not a game, not a game. We talking about practice.
Now let's talk about his physical skills and technical skills. He was fast. We knew him for his explosiveness and being able to cut to the basket and blow by past his defenders. He was speedy. He could shift and change angles really quickly. But more importantly, footwork. Footwork was key for Allen Iverson to do better against his opponents and his defenders. And that translates directly with combat sports, particularly boxing and kickboxing and MMA. So Allen Iverson had really good footwork, as I mentioned, and he was good at feints. So when he was feinting, he would do a lot of jab steps and pull back, or just even some shoulder fakes, fake up before he would throw a shot.
Iverson picked up now by Margo, just checked in. Iverson's
not much different from boxing when I'm feeling out my opponent and I would have to throw my jab, take a half step just to maneuver around my opponents. So speaking about footwork, there's a move in basketball and Iverson mastered it called the killer crossover. Now, a crossover allows you to blow by past your defenders by faking one direction and moving laterally to another. So Iverson would dribble and shift and get past his defender, whether to go forward, different angle, pass, or shoot. And sometimes he would do a double crossover where he would shift from here back to that side and back here. Now, that lateral shift works really well in combat sports. I've done a video in the past where I show the lateral shift that Mike Tyson did, that he mastered. Mechanics of a crossover from shifting one side to the other is very similar to a lateral shift when you're trying to land a shot from the outside of your opponent. Switching up on your opponent within their box circle allows you to get an upper hand, but you got to be able to be quick and explosive and be able to load and explode from one side to the other, just like you would with the crossover. Now, another thing that Allen Iverson was good at, specifically related to his ball handling skills and change of speed, was he was great at breaking people's ankles. Now, when I say breaking people's ankles, I mean figuratively. You'll see it in combat sports where in submission fighting, people really crank on a submission and literally break their ankles. But I don't mean that aspect. So in basketball, breaking someone's ankles, like let's say Iverson's crossover, where he'd switch in here, that resulted often with a player falling on their butt and then losing their footwork. I like to use that same concept in fighting where I would make my opponent go one direction or force them to go one direction, but then quickly shift and catch them on the other side. That allowed me to figuratively break their ankles in their footwork and allowing me more opportunities for the offense. So Allen Iverson was one of the best ball handlers of all time. Now, how does that translate to boxing or MMA? Well, ball handling requires a good pair of hand-eye coordination mixed with footwork. So if you're able to handle the ball well, you can manipulate your opponents really well too. Don't you see the comparison with boxing or MMA? When you have to manipulate your opponent with your strikes, feints, and tying it in with your footwork is very crucial to be able to manipulate your opponents and force reactions. So that inspired me because I was able to use what Allen Iverson did in his best skills and translate that to boxing and MMA. And tying in with footwork. Now, in footwork requires a good pivot foot. Iverson was really good at pivoting off his feet because he would be able to back down, switch, and pivot around his opponents if he needed to spin or take a shot. Again, very similar to boxing or kickboxing, where you need to work off your pivot foot to get a better position against your opponents. Pivoting is very crucial. Tying in with footwork allows you to be able to match your opponent and be able to mirror their movements or be able to cut them off as well. So another aspect of Iverson's game that I always used as inspiration for combat sports was his defense. Now he's kind of underrated in terms of defense. He wasn't the best on-ball defender, but he had really good court vision. He could see where people were moving. He would be able to pick their pockets, so to speak, when he tapped the ball away from them, stealing the ball and leading to a play on the other end. Now, how that inspired me for combat sports was I became precision based. I decided I wanted to have laser focus when I'm watching my opponents. I like to read how they move, read how they give away some tells. And again, inspired by Allen Iverson's precision and focus when he was reading his opponents. Now, to tie it in all together, Iverson was really good at making his opponents make mistakes. So his defenders, they would fall for his feints, his pull-ups, whatever he did to manipulate his opponents. That was something I always admired. Now that entails putting everything together, being able to use your footwork, use your movement, use your pivoting, and then they would have to respect every aspect of your game. I did the same thing for combat sports. I wanted to make my opponents make mistakes. I wanted them to fall for my feints, my jab steps, my reactions, forcing their reaction, and then I would capitalize on it. So these are aspects of his game. They weren't always his actual moves, but I took the concepts of his moves and applied that to combat sports. Okay. So those were all the key points that I found that Allen Iverson was a big inspiration for me when it came to combat sports. I hope you got to see the aspects, and maybe you guys have somebody, an athlete outside of combat sports that inspires you. And if you do have someone, leave their name in the comment. Tell me who you thought inspired you for your relative sport. Finally, the last thing I'd like to say about Allen Iverson was his determination and his courage. As I mentioned before, he embodied that warrior mindset. He never gave up. He would even push through injuries just to play his game, to ensure that his team would win, him being the star player of his team. There was a lot of responsibility that he held on his shoulders when he was playing in his prime. I always looked up to that. Now, it wasn't always the smartest thing to play through injuries, but it was admirable to see his courage and still push through, and then have that courage to drive to the basket, scoring over much larger defenders. So that was a big inspiration for me, especially being not the biggest guy in the ring. So if you like this video and you'd like to see more content like this, please don't forget to subscribe, follow this channel, and I'll see you next time.